Hello everyone, this is Cody Lee of BlackCatBooks.org, author of I, the Dragon, Cool and Beautiful, Rabbit Hole, Lore and Frey, and the upcoming Jaw of the Dragon. So recently I've been talking a lot about the PS5 and upcoming titles for the console and the upcoming year of the console and kind of talking about how there's been a lot of positive coverage to the PS5 right now. And I feel like it's been so long since I've touched on the PlayStation console that a lot of newer viewers may not know my feelings on the brand, specifically how much I hate it. And nothing's changed going into the PS5 generation. It's everything is a complete disaster. Everything is terrible. The company's on the way out. They will not be able to continue to compete with Nintendo in this capacity for much longer. It's the same thing I've been saying since 2013, since the PS3 days, since The Last of Us came out. PS5 has no games. I suppose we should probably call this PlayStation has no games now, because it's a pervasive problem with the PlayStation brand. Every console generation seems to give us less and less games. Even the PS4 had Arkham Knight, Bloodborne, and The Witcher 3 by this point. What exactly does the PS5 have? Jack and shit, okay? And Jack just left town. It is absurd just how little the console really has remained on anyone's mind in the past couple of years. It's been out since 2020, and it's only just now getting mediocre open world RPGs like Elden Ring and Hogwarts Legacy. Oh, I'm sorry, Elden Ring isn't even a PS5 next gen exclusive. It's also available on PS4 and Xbox One. What exactly are people buying these new pieces of hardware for? It just begs the question. Looking at the upcoming lineup for PS5, what exactly are people looking forward to? There are a handful of big games from upcoming franchises, stuff GTA 6, I think, is the big one. But other than that, nothing, really nothing. And I think it's safe to say that, with what we know about GTA 6, that it is going to be disappointing, that it is going to be underwhelming after 5, a decade-long wait for, a game that's worth in GTA 5 is not going to, resonate very well with the audience. You have the general, Call of Duty audience. It feels more and more as if, the cracks are deepening, more and more we're going long periods of time with absolutely nothing of value coming to the PlayStation brand at all. Meanwhile, the PlayStation audience, the shills, the YouTubers, the game journos, they're trying to tell you that PS5 is extremely popular, and it's the Switch that's on the way out, that it's the Switch that can't compete, that it's the Switch not getting any games. But, I can tell you that I've been playing great games on Nintendo Switch all year long, with the Nintendo Switch Online expansion, with Fire Emblem Engage, Cereza and the Lost Demon, Advance Wars is coming out this month. Tears of the Kingdom in May, Pikmin 4 in July. The Switch is well on its way to having a great year. Almost as good, or if not better, than last year, which I would have said was one of the best years ever for Nintendo. The Switch is in this really golden age period, and the establishment does not want to admit it. I just noticed that Angry Joe is conveniently ignoring the highly popular, highly influential, highly successful Tears of the Kingdom gameplay demonstration video, which pretty much single-handedly proves that Tears of the Kingdom is going to be a better game than Elden Ring, Hogwarts Legacy, whatever upcoming Assassin's Creed game is coming out. Tears of the Kingdom showcases that Nintendo is once again innovating in this area that fanboys like to pretend they could not succeed in. Previously, it was open world games, and now it's games with crafting systems. Nintendo has streamlined the crafting system and made something unique, compelling, and interesting in it in a new open world format. Tears of the Kingdom is going to demolish the competition, and much like how they're downplaying the Mario movie right now, nobody really wants to admit it. Nobody wants to acknowledge that Nintendo has essentially reached the point where they can realistically pump out high quality games all year long by themselves, in spite of the entire industry being against them, in spite of the entire industry trying to make them fail. That's what we've been seeing consistently. That's what we've always seen over the past 25 years. PlayStation has been a cancer on video games. Because of like the way the console is set up, we're reaching the point where like these games with like 10-year dev cycles, like they're coming out on PS5, and then if you're going to get a sequel, you're going to have to get a PS6. Like I've seen articles about that, about how games take so long to make that they have to target the next generation of platforms instead of doing the simple thing and scaling back and making a more fun, entertaining game for the Nintendo audience. Again, this is the core problem, I think. The reason why games are taking so long to make, why we're not seeing a lot of variety, why a lot of franchises have died. Every single like PlayStation developer, from Capcom to Square Enix to like EA to like Ubisoft, like all these companies, like what they're trying to do, they're essentially reliant on a handful of like high profile, highly lucrative franchises that like, are only popular because they have the illusion of being open-ended and like extremely cutting edge. Skyrim is a great example. Like you go into the world of Skyrim and you're just like, holy shit, it's a realistic fantasy game with all these things to do, all these spells to master, all these characters to meet. This is going to take like hundreds of hours. And if you're like most players, you play it for like 10 hours and then realize it's like, wow, I'm done with this game because it's very boring. That's the Skyrim audience, right? And for a lot of casual players, like that was, an entertaining experience. Like they just assumed that like, oh yeah, I'm just not, into the game. I'm just like, had my fill of it. I, got to experience it and I'm happy with that, right? Like I don't need to finish the game. I don't need to finish the main storyline. I don't need to like decide what I want to do, like role play or anything. Like I had fun with Skyrim for what it is, right? They don't really acknowledge that or understand that there are better games out there. Breath of the Wild just stomped all over Skyrim in every way, shape, and form. And we're kind of at that weird point where it feels like a lot of people in the gaming sphere, particularly in the PC gaming world, like don't even seem to understand that Breath of the Wild exists. Like it's weird that this game sold 30 million units, that it's highly popular, that it's revitalized the Zelda series, that stomped all of its competition, and yet somehow we're still in this like weird delusional phase where people are trying to pretend that Nintendo can't compete, which is laughable considering how quickly they managed to pump out Tears of the Kingdom. And again, Tears of the Kingdom has been pumped out extremely quickly. With those new mechanics, those new features, those new areas. Like when you compare it to something like, GTA 5 to going to GTA 6, it's been like a straight decade since that game. And I guarantee you GTA 6 is going to be a less of an upgrade than Tears of the Kingdom was over Breath of the Wild, right? Everyone wants like focus on like the reused map thing, but like Tears of the Kingdom really does seem to have like a bunch of new mechanics and a bunch of new features that like were not in Breath of the Wild, and it's laughable just how many people have downplayed it. And again, this is the kind of the problem I have with this like worship of PlayStation the third party franchises is that like, legitimately good, innovative, creative titles like Breath of the Wild do not reach the audience. Like, I really do think Breath of the Wild really should have like broken 40 or 50 million units sold, right? I'm sure I'm sure with the success of Tears of the Kingdom and like the popularity of the Mario movie, we're going to see like a surge in popularity for Nintendo and their brand, but like, and maybe we'll get like a couple million units sold for Breath of the Wild before the end of the generation. But like, for all intents and purposes, like, it sold 30 million units, but like, this should be considered the generation-defining open-world game, right? It should be considered the next evolution for this formula, right? It should be considered like a masterpiece. Like, it should be considered one of the best games ever made on any platform. But it's not. Because it's a Nintendo exclusive, because, the industry is not allowed to acknowledge Zelda in any meaningful capacity, Nintendo in any meaningful capacity. They just write it off, ignore it, and hope that people forget about it. It is the game that really should have been considered the next Skyrim for that thing. And again, it's so frustrating seeing like people try and hype up Elden Ring, a fringe IP that with no real audience to speak of, as being like, a truly great open world game when, it's already been forgotten and it's not that big of a deal. I mean, if it's anything like Bloodborne, like 0.2% of the player base actually got past the first boss. But like, what we're seeing here is this the situation where like, general audiences, people who just don't spend a lot of time playing Nintendo games, like they really are bamboozled into thinking that like PlayStation consoles are like must-haves, right? They really do think that like the good games are going to come to PlayStation eventually. And I really have to ask, when is that going to happen? Where are the games? We're like 3 years in already. Well, 2 years in. Two and a little bit of 2 and a couple of months. Like we're over 2 years in right now, right? The console's been on the market for quite some time now. They've had some time to like settle, and like, games are coming out now. Like Forspoken was a disaster, Like Callisto Protocol was a disaster. Like so many like major games from these studios have been disasters. And I just have to like, tell you guys that going forward, I think a lot more of these big PlayStation games, they're going to look a lot like Forspoken. They're going to look a lot like Final Fantasy 16. They're going to look a lot like Hi-Fi Rush. I know that's an Xbox game, but like, it's going to be like the same thing over and over and over again. The Last of Us Part 2. It's going to be the same thing over and over and over and over again, where you get a high-profile title that looks photorealistic. It's cinematic. It has like this big open world. It's going to be the next big thing. And then it comes out, and then everyone forgets about it. Like, how many people do you know who talk about Horizon Forbidden West or Ghost of Tsushima or Days Gone or Death Stranding? Like it really does feel like we're in a weird position now where like The Last of Us is really the only relevant PlayStation IP left, and that's mostly because of the nepotism showcase towards Neil Druckmann. Like they desperately want Neil's game to succeed, and they'll like do anything possible to make it happen. And I just don't think it's going to work. Like, I think The Last of Us is fundamentally a dead IP. Like, considering how expensive The Last of Us Part 2 was to develop, I think The Last of Us Part 3 could legit, like, sink Naughty Dog. It could legit, like, cause a lot of problems for Sony. And it could legit, like, show the general audiences that there is no salvaging this company. Like, the games are never, ever going to come. Like, how much longer can like Naughty Dog continue this narrative, this facade that they're one of the best studios in gaming, which has never been true, by the way, when they haven't put out a game in over a decade, right? Like, so many people shilled Uncharted 4. How many people do you know who remember it now? Or remember it came out at all, right? People say The Last of Us is one of the best TV shows of all time. Who's talking about it now? You're seeing people like, oh man, The Last of Us. Even now, like the people who are like paid to shill The Last of Us Part 2, like pretend it's actually pretty good. Like it's just a bunch of like impotent like nerds trying to like convince you of like the obvious fact that The Last of Us Part 2 is pure trash, and it was not successful, and it will not lead into like a successful third entry, right? The Last of Us is a dead IP, as PlayStation is a dead console brand. So with that in mind, I'm very curious to see like how PlayStation owners try and continue to justify purchasing new PlayStation hardware when there's really nothing to play. Like it's been like that for a long time, since like the early PS3 eras, but I think it's getting worse with like each passing generation. More and more studios are going under, less and less games are getting made. PlayStation is taking less and less risks. Like it just feels like that PlayStation is a dying brand, and nobody wants to admit it because they're PlayStation. They're the industry who saved us all from the evil Nintendo. It's a joke. It always has been, and I will be very, very glad when PlayStation finally goes the way of the dodo.